Well, today is a really busy day. We got the concrete people. It's like 7:30. They're already ready to pour the crawl space floor, and then we also have the timbers arriving today. So between those two, there's a lot going on. I have to kind of make sure my staging area for the timbers is ready to go. Here's our timbers coming. Keep coming straight. Straight. That's good. How am I going to get these off there? These lower ones I can probably do. Worried about those top ones. And that is going to be not fun. So yeah, it definitely was a challenge getting the timbers off, especially the uppermost timbers, as the forks of my tractor weren't quite tall enough to reach. But luckily the topmost timbers were smaller ones, and we were able to slide several of them off at a time onto the forks and then go set them down. The next set of timbers under that were my largest and heaviest and had me the most nervous. They were the 24-foot long, 10-inch by 12-inch timbers that would make up my carrying beams. I'm using my John Deere 4044M tractor, which is a 40-horse tractor and has a lift capacity of about 2,000 pounds. I purchased this tractor a couple years ago to maintain our property, but also with the plan of needing it to move logs for sawmilling one day and also to build this timber frame house. And this tractor has been absolutely awesome. It's paid for itself many times over already, and I definitely couldn't have done pretty much any of this without it. It's been a great investment.
That is a big piece of wood.
Now, speaking of sawmilling, I originally had debated on whether or not to saw all my own timbers for this house, but ultimately I decided to order timbers from a sawmill that can plane them perfectly square, and there are a few really good reasons why I went this route. First being time. This is a pretty big house. In hindsight, I kind of wish we would have went smaller, but when we were designing it and living with 3 kids in our 700 square foot loft above our barn, our dreams got a little bit carried away and we designed a pretty big house, but it'll be awesome in the end. Anyways, it's a big house with a lot of timbers, and this truckload was only half of them, not including the garage that we need to build in the future. So it would have been a ton of work sawing all those timbers, time that I knew I just didn't have. And yes, it would have been really cool to have sawn all my own timbers and say that I did that, but from a workload standpoint, I just knew I wasn't going to have time, and honestly, I'm really glad I didn't attempt that. Now, the next major reason I purchased the timbers was because the timber framing method that I prefer, and the one that I think is the most conducive to teach, especially new students, which is called mill rule timber framing, and it uses timbers that are milled by a giant planer on all 4 sides to give you a perfectly square and true dimension timber. So when I need a 10-inch by 10-inch post, it's going to be exactly 10 inches by 10 inches, not 9 7/8 by 10 1/8. Now, if I were to mill my own timbers or order timbers from a sawmill that didn't have a planer, I would likely be off 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch on each face, and then I would want to use a different form of timber framing called square rule. Square rule is probably the most common form of layout because it doesn't need perfect timbers. It cuts away housings and reduces tenons and joinery at each joint location to expose what they call the perfect timber within. But it requires a little more skill and definitely takes longer to lay out and cut the joinery than in mill rule. And so from the prospect of speed and efficiency and teaching new students, I definitely prefer mill rule. Now, the downside of that, of course, is that milled timbers are going to cost more and they're harder to find because there's a lot fewer sawmills that actually have these giant planers that can mill these giant timbers. My friends over at Shelter Institute have a really good video on the difference between mill rule, square rule, and scribe rule. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, go check out that video. I'll put a link down in the description. I used a sawmill in Naples, New York called Clark's Fork Timber. They specialize in sawing timbers for the timber framing industry, and they have a giant four-headed planer that's able to plane timbers perfectly square for something like mill roll. So I called them up and they answered all my questions. They were great to work with, so I put down a deposit to place my order. They were very responsive and gave me lots of updates while the timbers were being milled and when they were supposed to be shipped, and they arrived on time and in very good shape from the trip. And the truckers were also very patient with me as I took longer than the customary 2 hours that is typically expected to unload a delivery like this. And after working with the timbers, I can also say that they were milled very accurately, which I was really happy about. It made teaching layout and cutting the joinery a lot easier. I know they ship all over the US and I believe Canada, so if you're looking for some really nice squared milled timbers, make sure you give them a call. I'll leave their contact info down in the description. And I used white pine for my project, but I know they also offer Doug fir and some other species as well. So make sure you give them a call. They were a really good company to work with. All right, so we got our timbers yesterday unloaded just using the old John Deere, and that was quite the adventure. That was a lot of work. Anyway, today what I need to do, and I wish I would have been able to do this yesterday, is I want to seal all the ends with anchor seal. As you can see, there's starting to be some checking along the tops and along the sides and along the ends, and that's gonna happen, but we want to slow that down as much as possible and control the drying, because when we're cutting these, we want these nice and wet still. We don't want to trap too much moisture so that they start to stain and the fungus forms that will stain the wood. So we're going to cover them with tarps but let air go through there. So we're going to try to balance keeping moisture in there and especially sealing the grain, the end grain. That's where the majority of the moisture leaves. So we're going to go around. There's a couple of uneven ends. We're going to saw those flush, just the little parts that are sticking out, and then we're going to coat everything with anchor seal and get 2 of the piles covered. And then I'm going to have to order some more tarps to cover the other piles, and then I need to organize all those, so I'll take those off at some point here soon and get everything separated for the main house, the 2 wings, the 2 porches, get everything kind of organized and ready to go. So that's what we're going to do real quick right now. See, we got to cut that off so that the anchor seal can work better. We're going to get started. Let's go. This is a little, might be undersized. So a couple quick notes about cut surfaces. The smoother your cut surface is, whether it's the faces of the timber or the end grain, the less product it will need to oil or seal it or even stain it. And that's true in timber framing or woodworking or any kind of finishing. So if you're cutting timbers yourself, try to start with nice smooth cuts on your ends and then seal them right away. It'll save you money with anchor seal. And then later on, when all my timbers are cut to length and all the joinery is cut out on them, I will take a very light pass with my 12-inch Makita power planer to clean up any grime or layout markings before oiling. The plain surface of the wood will soak up just the right amount of finish, and it'll use a lot less oil or stain than a rough sawn surface or even a sanded surface. Unfortunately, I don't have room inside my shop or under some nice covered structure, so I need to work on and store my timbers outside. And I find that it's best to store the timbers in a shady area with nice airflow, and I sticker each row and also leave a 1-inch gap between each timber. Then I'll put tarps over the stacks when I'm not using them, and where I'm located in Michigan and my normal humidity levels, I like to keep my timbers about a foot off the ground and drape my tarps so that they're barely covering the bottom timbers. This leaves a nice gap below the stack that air can get underneath, and it doesn't trap too much water, causing mold, mildew, or staining problems. It's really important to check your timbers often while they're being stored and make sure that you aren't trapping too much moisture. It's a balancing act between slowing the drying down and still letting it breathe. All right, so I went inside, found a little spray bottle, put a little anchor seal in there. I'm gonna see if I can spray it like these really coarse areas. See if I can get better coverage with that. Oh, that works. It's real thick, but I don't know if that's more or less material, but some of these things I'll be able to get it deep in these cracks. At least help. It uses quite a bit too, but maybe I can spread that around with the roller now. So it's an option.
I like that one.
But we don't want to touch it though, do we?
I like that.
You like this color?
It's the same
Oh,
color.
don't touch
It's the same color on the truck.
It's the same color in my truck.
Yeah. Can we step up here?
Sure.
Yeah.
Everything's a toy. What you doing up there, Henry?
I'm going right back.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Next video, we're going to be doing some sawmilling. We got to make some more of these big sawhorses to stack more timbers that are coming. So that should be a really fun video, and I hope you just continue to follow along on this Dream Build series where I try to build my family our timber frame house. Thanks so much. See you next time.